Thank you very much, David. I have the pleasure to introduce to you Major General Retired Amos Yadlin, which by now you all know. So I will just give the highlights of his impressive career. He was director of the top think tank in Israel, the INSS, the Institute for National Security Studies, and he was also the head of Israel's military intelligence. And as you all know, he's now the chair of FELNET's Forum of Strategic Dialogue. And I invite you all to join me in a journey in which Amos will give you a briefing about the growing security threats that Israel is facing in the midst of a political crisis that we all read about immensely in the last few months. And that all keeps us very busy. So without further ado, please go ahead, Amos, and give us some highlights of what has been happening in the recent weeks.
Okay, thank you very much, Pascaline. Happy Labor Day for everybody. It's the 1st of May, 6 months since Israel has election, and 4 months since Netanyahu created his sixth government. When he introduced the government to the Knesset, and basically during the campaign, he spoke about 4 issues: stopping Iran nuclear program, joining the Saudis to the Abrahamic Accord, dealing with the cost of living, the security, internal security, domestic security in Israel. The judicial issue was not mentioned, but what happened since he started the negotiation for the new coalition, and during the 4 months that this government is on road, unfortunately, Iran was put aside, Saudi was put aside. The cost of living was first discussed last night, and the internal security is deteriorating. What I will try to cover this afternoon is what is happening in the Iranian front, what is the chances of bringing the Saudis on board, and what is happening during the last Passover, which overlapped with Ramadan, which was a security crisis. And if we left with some time, I can also dive into the political crisis in Israel, because this is now leading basically every decision in Israel. And unfortunately, personally, I fought for 50 years to protect Israel from the outside against militaries, air forces, terror, all our enemies on the borders. And then 10 years as a chief of the main think tank, I was basically protecting Israel on the international arena. And now what happened in the last 4 months, that the damage to the national security of Israel was done domestically from inside. And Israel destroyed a lot of its value as a strong military with deterrence vis-a-vis the surrounding. The economy was turned south, and our international standing is suffering. But I will come to it in the end. Let me share with you a screen. Can you see it? Okay, yes. So 3 questions or 4 questions to discuss this afternoon. Is Iran breaking to the bone? As we are dealing with demonstration in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Is there a Saudi deal? or if there is Saudi deal, this is the deal we wanted between Israel and the Saudis, or the deal, unfortunately, is between the Saudis and the Iranians. Then we will look a little bit about the Ramadan events, and as I say, the judicial crisis in Israel. Iran nuclear program. Iran was never so close to the bomb. The Iranians by now has more than 4 tons of enriched uranium, 20%, 60%. It's equivalent for sufficient quantity for 5 bombs if it will be enriched to 90%. Don't get into panic. They still have to build the bomb, the weapon itself, and the weapon itself will take, if you are pessimistic, 6 months, if you are optimistic, 2 years. But on the fissile material track, which was the main track that the US and Israel tried to stop, they already in the threshold, very difficult to assume that we can stop them because they have a lot of material, they are deep in the ground, and it's up to them to decide when they will break out. The Biden administration tried very much to go back to the JCPOA, very much like a customer getting to the store and saying to the seller, I'm not negotiating, I will not leave the store without the merchandise. And the Iranians are very good negotiators. They felt the eagerness of the US to go back to the JCPOA, and they raised the price to a level that even the Biden administration that committed in the campaign to go back to the JCPOA, that its approach to the JCPOA is a positive one, because this is a diplomatic solution and they believe in diplomatic solutions. Even Rob Malley, who was the negotiator for them, was unable to reach an agreement. And then the Iranians shoot their own 2 legs by supplying drones to Russia and by being very tough on the demonstrations, killing young people, young women in the street, hanging some of the leaders. And the Biden administration basically, the president said in a meeting before the midterm that the JCPOA is dead. If you ask me, it is not dead. It's in coma. If the Iranians will go down from the high demands that they have, the US will go back to the JCPOA. As long as I see Rob Malley going to Oman, meeting the Iranian ambassador to the UN, the JCPOA is not really dead. Iran has a very cold winter because sanctions were effective, and they haven't reached the agreement that they hope to remove the sanction. And as I said, the rest of the world finally saw Iran as countries that belong to the bad guys. They have a strategic alliance with Russia and China. However, as they approach the winter, they have a lovely, as they approach the spring look better for the Iranians. The Chinese brokered an agreement with the Saudis. We will cover it in a minute. And they feel now stronger than before, feeling that Israel is in a deep domestic crisis. And if you look at this picture down here, this picture is counting down to 2040, which is the year that the Supreme
Amos, I think you should move to the next slide because we're on the first slide.
Ah, really? Can you see this one?
Yeah.
Okay. So I will speak. This slide is basically counting down a board in Tehran to the year 2040, that the Supreme Leader promised that Israel will be destroyed. Today, they are contemplating on updating it. And the Supreme Leader, very much like Nasrallah, his main proxy, told everybody that due to what's happening in Israel, it may happen not in 2040, but much earlier. So the US strategy today, you saw that okay. The US strategy today is to freeze the problem. If you look at point number 4, China is the main US strategic challenge. The war in Ukraine is the second concern, and they don't want to go to any other war in the Middle East. So even if they say that they want Iran not to be with nuclear weapon, the way to achieve it is containment, deterrence, degradation of the program, diplomacy, but basically put a lead on the program. If they were in the beginning of the Biden administration, to put it back to the box, it's even not back to the box. And what I can feel in DC when I visit America is two concerns. The first is from Iranian escalation, basically Iran breaking out to the bomb, starting weaponization, leaving the NPT, or any other way of going to the bomb. And there is also fear of Israel doing something that will drag the US into a conflict with Iran. The Israeli strategy is by all means prevention, and prevention can be done only by escalation, because deterrence is not enough, covert operation is not enough, and basically, like always, the Israeli military option is on the table. When they speak with the Americans, they ask for maximum pressure to deter Iran and to force it to compromise. However, the Biden administration for a year and a half indicated that maximum pressure during Trump time is not working. So how come you ask them now to have maximum pressure? But this is the only strategy left for America. What we see in 2023 so far is a strategic equilibrium. The US and Iran are in equilibrium. None of them want to escalate. So the Iranians are not going to 90% because they are afraid that this will be a red line to the Americans, and they will be brought to the IAC, to Vienna, to the Atomic Agency, or to the Security Council, or an American or Israeli attack. And the Israelis and the Americans are very careful not to induce a 90% or withdrawal from NPT. So it's kind of equilibrium until now. And the question is, what can disrupt the balance? An Israeli move, an Iranian escalation, or miscalculation of one of the sides. And what Israel and the US will do if the Iranians cross the red line that nobody really knows what it is. It is considered to be in a 90%, but I never heard it formally loud and clear. So we have to look into the second part of 2023 on two issues: whether the Iranians will move forward, because they can move much faster than they are moving, and what Israel and America will agree to do, whether it will be done together or separately by Israel. Since the Prime Minister is not invited to DC, and this is because of Article 4 in my briefing, we are missing and losing the capability to coordinate the policies with the US. And there is strategic distrust. The government of Israel is indicating or emphasizing 3 C's: coercion, regime change, and credible threat, military threat. And the US, 3 Ds: deterrence, degradation, diplomacy. You don't see a credible military threat here. And they are not meeting, both of them, Biden and Bibi. So this is Iran. Next is the wish for the Saudis to join the Abrahamic Accord as a very important Arab country. The Saudis are the richest in the Arab country, in the Middle East, in the Arab nations, and the Saudis are much more important than the UAE or Bahrain. And we all want to see them in the White House signing agreement with Israel. What we got instead is in Beijing, the foreign ministers of China, Iran, and the Saudis are signing not kind of a peace agreement, because there was not war between Iran and Saudis, but resumption of the diplomatic relations that were disconnected in 2016 after the Saudis executed an imam, a Shia imam, and the Iranian, in retaliation, destroyed the Saudi embassy in Tehran. But there is also a proxy war there in Yemen, which is very, very important. And there are tensions because the Saudis were also attacked directly from Iran, even though the two countries never admit that this was really happened in September 2019. But I will go to the US Saudi Israel idea. And here, an insight of the future of a deal. First, the road from Jerusalem to Riyadh runs through Washington because it's trilateral deal. It is not bilateral deal. So were the Abrahamic Accord in 2020. It was trilateral deal. Israel gave up the annexation. The UAE normalized and recognized Israel and has peace with Israel. And the Americans gave the UAE advanced weapons, F-35 and others. The same was with Morocco. The Americans gave for recognition in West Sahara. Morocco gave Israel recognition and diplomatic relation, and Israel gave up the annexation. So what is the trilateral deal here? The basic understanding is that the most important part in this triangle is the Riyadh DC and not Jerusalem. If Jerusalem want to achieve Abrahamic Accord 2.0 with the Saudis, the Americans has to pay the Saudis much more than they paid in the past to the UAE or to Morocco or to Bahrain. And if in the past people thought in the Middle East that the way to Washington goes through Jerusalem because they believe in the protocols of the elders of Zion, that Israel has a huge influence in Washington, especially on Congress, it's the other way around today. And I have to, I think, take this out. Three necessary political changes for the deal. I don't think the deal will happen before there is new administration in the US. a different political coalition in Israel, and establishment of MBS as the one who have made all the decision. His father has to remove, to leave the stage. Why? Because the Biden administration and the Saudis are now in a hostile relation. It started with campaign claims that Saudi will be a pariah state, and Khashoggi as a main issue between the two countries. And then the Saudis have a very cold reception to the president who came to visit them, and then they refused to have more production before the midterm. On the contrary, they cut production. They have done alliance with Russia. So the relations between Riyadh and DC are quite problematic. So we need, I think the Saudis decided that this is a hostile administration, and they have to wait for another administration. In Israel, you can't see the Netanyahu government giving the Saudis anything on the Palestinian issue. And about a year ago, the Palestinians was not asking for a lot on the Palestinian issue, something symbolic. This is not the case now. When you have such an extreme right-wing government, they ask for more. They ask for more, and Netanyahu cannot give a speech on two-state solution that Lapid was able to give. The Saudis understand that you cannot make a Palestinian state tomorrow, that there is no deal that Israel can accept and the Palestinians will accept. But they want to see the two-state solution as the true north for every, at least as a lip service. But Netanyahu even cannot make a lip service today as he did in 2009. And stopping the annexation, he already gave to MBZ, and MBS want much more. So we need another coalition in Israel, and we need MBS to not to be afraid of his father, that the Palestinian issue is still very important to him. I think the effect of Iran-Saudi relations, that was a huge motivation for the Saudis to come to Israel, is now disappear in a way. They hedged against the Iranians. They are not trusting the Americans to give them security guarantees. And in this case, to have a detente with the Saudis, with the Iranians, seems to be like a better idea. What the Saudis asking from the US? They're asking from the US security guarantees, a free trade zone, advanced weapon, and nuclear program. The first two, Israel is not objecting. Security guarantee, fine. It's an American problem how they give them a security guarantee, because they ask an Article 5 kind of security guarantee, and this is very difficult for the Americans. Free trade zone, Israel has no problem with it. Eroding Israel military capabilities, advanced capabilities, is a problem. What is called QME, qualitative military edge. And of course, a nuclear program is a problem, because the Saudis asking for the same restrictions that were given to the Iranian in the JCPOA. And this is much beyond what is called the gold standard that was given to the UAE, that they don't have the capability to enrich uranium in their own country. But the Saudis want what the Iranians got, and this is a huge problem for Israel. Then there is the obstacle of Saudi-China relation. The Chinese basically told the Americans, we used to be your own ally in the Middle East, not anymore. not that we are ally of your enemies, but one of the Saudis told me, you Jews and Christians, you allowed one wife. We are Muslims. We allowed 4 wives. So we will have you, the Americans, and the Chinese, and the Russians, and who knows, the Israelis, the Iranians. So America is very sensitive to Chinese presence. The UAE haven't got their F-35 because they bought 5G communication from the Chinese. And the Americans saw some Chinese activities on other areas. So the issue of Saudi and China relation has nothing to do with Israel, but it's an obstacle if you think about a trilateral deal. And I spoke already on the Saudi commitment to the Palestinian issue. Third item, post-Ramadan. Israel was ready to an eruption of hostilities in all our fronts: Gaza, West Bank, Jerusalem, Lebanon border, Syria, and Iran. This is a new phenomenon. I think the last war that we have 2 active fronts were 50 years ago. The last war was 50 years ago, and Yom Kippur War. The time Egypt and Syria started the war, 67, 3 countries, including Jordan. 48, 5 countries, including Iraq and Lebanon and Saudi. The last 50 years, we enjoy the fact that we have only 1 front. First Lebanon war, second Lebanon war, round in Gaza, another round in Gaza, another round in Gaza. What we have this time, and we predicted that this is going to happen, was a multi-front event. But it started before Ramadan. It started with this vehicle, which belonged to an unfortunate Arab Israeli that was attacked by ID, very advanced ID, that was smuggled from Hezbollah in Lebanon towards Megiddo. Megiddo is much closer to Jenin than to the Lebanese border, and that was the intention of Nasrallah when he approved it. Say, I will not admit that it's a Hezbollah attack. The Israelis will have to agree that this is a Palestinian attack, but due to intelligence, due to the sophistication of the ID, we know that it was Hezbollah. We were fortunate. When he pushed the button in the first time, it was towards a bus. If this IED was hit a bus, 10 to 20 people were killed, would have been killed. This is a trigger for war. A trigger for war. So Nasrallah was in a way lucky that the terrorist that he sent was unable to target a bus, and he targeted this private car. Israel reacted in 4 attacks on Hezbollah in Syria that killed 2 Iranians officers. Usually when Israel attack in Syria, it's more attacking of the infrastructure, of the armament, of the missile, rocket. We're trying not to kill Iranians. This time, we didn't try hard, because it was a message to Iran. We know who is behind the Hezbollah attack, and we are warning you. And then came Ramadan. And unfortunately on Ramadan, there was a lot of incitement from the outside, a lot of coordination between all the bad guys, and they waited to us to make the mistake on the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount is the core of all the fronts around us. And when the Israeli police haven't behaved carefully enough, and nobody was killed, nobody was hurt, but some ugly clips were broadcast from the Temple Mount all over the Middle East. Israel was attacked from Gaza, from Lebanon, and from Syria. And it seems like a very coordinated attack that came from 3 fronts. Let's see what is our insight from the Ramadan that basically ended up with not exploding and not escalating to a full-scale war or a full-scale conflict as all the bad guys hope. One of the questions, was it an attack that was done by Iran, Nasrallah, the whole radical axis, or was it only a Hamas event, even though from 3 fronts? The IDF basically saying it's one organization, many fronts. Me personally, I believe in it. I think the inspiration, the authorization, the money, the weapon, it's all came from Iran. They haven't sit together in a command post and say now from Gaza, now from Lebanon. But the whole atmosphere was that Israel should be attacked from all the fronts. The convergence of the areas, of the arenas, is not a one-time event. It started in 2021 in the guards of the walls, and we have to plan that every time now, if one front is escalating, we can have attacks from other front as well. We have to look at Israeli deterrence. Some people say it's eroded, it's gone. Look, they are firing at us. What is the elements of the Israeli deterrence? It's the strength of the IDF. It's our relation with the US. It's what they think is in Dimona. And then the Israeli society, solidarity, resilience. All these elements were eroded, but not from 9.5 to 0, not from 9.5 to 3.5. In my view, from 9.5 to 8.5. They tried us, but very carefully, and when the IDF attacked back in Syria, in Gaza, very cautiously in Lebanon, by the way, because there is a mutual deterrence there, they basically stopped. And the rockets is easy to deal with. We have the Iron Dome. The problem is terror. Nobody was killed from rockets, even though tens of them were launched. But the murder of the D family, the sisters and the mother, was the deadliest attack in this Ramadan. I say already that Hezbollah threat from Lebanon there is a mutual deterrence here, and Israel is very, very careful. And I'm not sure the event is over, but it seems like at least Ramadan and Passover is over. I'm 40 minutes into the briefing. We can stop here. I can go a little bit more on the Israeli crisis. David, it's up to you.
I think, Pascaline, you have a few questions for Amos before we go to the audience.
I invite everyone to think about questions and don't hesitate to raise your hand or write them down during the discussion. By now, we don't have any questions yet, so if anything changes, then I will ask. Amos, if you can say a few points, I think it's important to talk about the judicial, and then in the meantime, everyone can think of questions.
Okay, the judicial crisis in Israel. As I said, this was not the subject that the elections were about. But after the election, it's become the main issue. And everybody has to remember Israel has no constitution. And if the Supreme Court will be controlled by the Knesset, which is controlling by the government, we are losing every check and balance in Israel. And Netanyahu, for years, as Likud leader, traditionally opposed any change in the court. He was supporter of the court. And now, due to the demands from his coalition partners, as well as the hope for himself to be in his appeal to the Supreme Court 5 years from now, to have much better and supporting Supreme Court for his case, he moved forward. In Israel today, we have two conflicting narratives. If you are Americans, you know it very well. On every issue, the right and the left have different narrative. The narrative in the left, or center left, because no left was left in Israel, but let's say the liberals in Israel. The reform changed Israel to be dictatorship. It's the end of democracy, no check and balance, and we are not going to sacrifice for such a state, which is a very strong statement. On the other side, we won the election, the people want the reform, even though you see that the polls today, most of the Israelis, including Likud voters, are against the reform. It's enhanced democracy, even though they don't explain how it's enhanced democracy. The leftist elite is afraid to lose control. The Supreme Court is controlling the country, and the opponents of the reform are to blame for all the damages to Israel. Two conflicting narratives, depends if you are listening to our 12th channel, which is the CNN, or to our 14th channel, which is the Fox News. They brought forward in a very aggressive way 120 laws. And this was basically their strategic political mistake, because it's not only the Attorney Generals that say that this was give government unrestrained power. They basically were able to wake up the liberal Israelis that was not really care about internal politics and judicial issues, but they gave everybody the feeling that they are now not protected and they have to go to the street and demonstrate. So the judicial blitz basically, as I say, was a very, very bad mistake. What drive it? I say Netanyahu to avoid jail. Justice Minister Levin ideologically committed to reduce the court power and want to appoint conservative judges and maybe politicians. The ultra-Orthodox want to avoid draft to the military. Basically, they want autonomy to their own communities, not to be subject to the laws of the state. The National Security Minister Ben-Gvir, he is a carnist, racist, wish to revoke the Arab minority right, and the Financial Minister Smotrich want halachic state. All of them together wanted very much to go forward. What pushed the Israelis to the street? The equal burden that the Haredim want to avoid, to save democracy. They still think that the prime minister is corrupt and there is allegations against him and he cannot run to be a prime minister when he is in court. The violence in the street, the incitement, and then when Netanyahu fired Gallant, it was, I think, a night to be remembered without any planning. 600,000 Israelis went to the street and say enough is enough. And then the prime minister basically stopped. He haven't suspended, but he stopped the legislation for a month of dialogue. The month of dialogue ended basically today. he wants to have the two holidays, Pesach and Independence Day, and even more the two Memorial Days, which are almost holidays in Israel. Holy days. In Israel, he didn't want the fight to be in the street and demonstration in all the ceremonies, so he agreed to stop the legislation and have conversation within the president house. Countering the reform, there are many arenas, basically 6. We don't know what will decide the battle because we never been there. We have been there maybe 2,000 years ago during the Second Temple, and the Jews basically fought each other. But we didn't have it since Israel was founded. Maybe last time for a very small one day, it was around Altalena in June 48. But since then, Israel is very united. And the vectors against the reform or the revolution, depends how you call it, is done in the Knesset. There are some members in Likud which are not happy about it. It's neither Gallant, no Bitan, Edelstein, and I'm not sure that Netanyahu haven't stopped because he was not sure that he will get enough votes. There is the Supreme Court still not with 15 members of Likud nominated to be judges, and they stopped the Deri, which was convicted twice, and they say that he cannot be a minister according to his plea bargain. The Supreme Court is still able to say that the legislation is not constitutional, and this will bring Israel into a constitutional crisis. There is the civil society protest and demonstration. It can go one step forward, which you haven't seen yet, more violent, or maybe refusing to pay taxes. There is the rift with the US and Europe, which is a source of concern to the government, to the prime minister, and the threat to Israeli economy. I say that the Israeli patriot will not do anything on the two right bottom issues, but he will go to the street and he will demonstrate. Let me go to the last slide, where Israel is heading. Civil war, I don't give it 1%. But I do remember that in the US in 1860s, they went to a civil war on a legislation, on a piece of legislation about slavery. We are in another century. The Israelis are now very proud that their demonstrations are, I will say, polite, quiet, very friendly, very family-wise gathering. If you compare it to the demonstration in Paris in the last 2 months, no broken in a store, not looting of a store, a very civilized demonstrations. In any minute tomorrow, Netanyahu can go to the Knesset and vote for the legislation. And then some kind of Hungarian dictatorship. It will not be in a day, but it's a process. We are now in a compromise freezing phase. Netanyahu already announced that the 1 month trying to reach compromise under the president is now extended into the summer seat of the Knesset. The liberal camp that against Netanyahu is very worried that he will move to the left and he will use the right timing to legislate what he wants to legislate. but others are still hoping that some kind of compromise will be achieved. By the way, in the liberal camp, you can see two camps. There is the most extreme resistance to the government that are not yet ready even to compromise on the legislation. They want the government to fail. They are led by former Prime Minister Barak, former Defense Minister Yadlin, former Chief of Staff Khalutz, and activists, young activists that say, we found our power. We are not going back to Israel of November 2022. From this crisis, we can also get an opportunity to agree on the need for constitution, on the need to have a better process, that not every 61 members of Knesset can change everything. And we need to have basic laws that cannot be reached in 61, only in 70, only in 80, and to make a new arrangement between the Supreme Court and the Knesset. Anyone who is optimist, hoping that this right green option will happen, but we are now between the two middle options. And I'll stop here.